looking at the results of our latest business surveys, a year after the impact of Brexit was first felt by businesses that import and export goods. So in today's webinar, we'll split it in 3 parts. In the first part, we will welcome David Barrier, Head of Research, and Stuart Morrison, Policy and Research Executive at the British Chambers, who will talk us through some fascinating data from some of our latest BCC business surveys of over 1,000 companies across the UK. The presentation will look in detail at how firms are adapting to the changes introduced by the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement and what support businesses are looking for to help them trade internationally. Now, these findings have already received coverage in the Financial Times and on the BCC and on the BBC even, but this event is an exclusive opportunity to look at the results in more depth, learn specifically about what the results might mean for your businesses, and really open up the floor for your questions and comments on these matters. We will then continue, and Liam Smith, who's BCC's Director of Trade Facilitation and Chamber Customs Managing Director, will then highlight the key changes that became effective from the 1st of January, and he will offer some reflections on how businesses have had to adapt to a whole new set of controls around the borders, new regulations that ensure that goods continue to flow in and out of the country. We will also look at the impact of compliance, and we'll talk about the penalties that could apply if these formalities are not adhered to correctly. In the last part of the webinar is where we invite you to participate and really take this chance to tap into the expertise that we have on the panel. So please put your points and questions across, and really use us. We have regular contact with senior level members of government, and it's good for you to feedback to us so that we can feedback to government and actually point out when things are not working very well. So for that, what we would ask you to do is to use the Q&A part of this of the platform. You should see it in your chat option. We'll try to stay away from chat, and we'll try to follow the Q&A structure, and we'll try to answer as many of your questions as possible. Now, a copy of the slides for today's presentation and a recording to this webinar will be available after the event. So you will receive an email with information on how to download and how to access that information. So that's it for me, and I would like to welcome David and Stuart, who will talk us through some of the results. David.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here this afternoon. As Emmanuel said, what I will do is share some slides which go into some of the details of the recent business surveys that we've conducted here at the British Chambers of Commerce. And as Emmanuel said, your input, you may well have inputted in some of these surveys. This input is absolutely vital to us because we are indeed speaking to the most senior people at the Bank of England and across government. And the data that we collect really does help shape government policy towards business on a range of areas. So what I'll do is just touch on some of those findings. For context, obviously, the British Chambers of Commerce is a network of 53 chambers across the UK, as well as almost 80 chambers worldwide. And we gather evidence from both the domestic and international market in order to shape policy. The research programme itself consists of 2 strands. We have something called the Quarterly Economic Survey, which is a general business sentiment survey that's gone back. It started in 1989. I'll pull out a couple of stats from that, from the recent edition of that. And then we also have a program of thematic business surveys where we go into more detail on issues like COVID, Brexit, the trading arrangements, net zero. And again, we'll draw on some of that as well from the recent surveys we've done now. As Emmanuel said, we get lots and lots of coverage for all of this. And the one thing I would actually say is if you are inputting into these surveys in future, we get a lot of media interest, and the media in particular are looking for case studies of businesses on the ground and how they're adapting to the various developments. So that's always an opportunity for businesses to get involved in. So typically when we run these surveys, we go out to our Chamber of Commerce membership And we get about 1,000 to 1,100 responses back each survey. The profile of those respondents is roughly a three-way split between manufacturers, business to consumer service sector firms, so hospitality, retail, etc., and business to business service sector firms, so lawyers, accountants, marketing, etc. Our membership's overwhelmingly SME, so it's north of 90%, and we've got a very high proportion of exporters in our samples, which is really useful when we look at the issues that the TCA has thrown out. So in very broad terms, I would say if we say the top four issues that businesses are facing with particular regard to the international dimension, there are four major areas that businesses are telling us they have challenges or thoughts on, at least. And our surveys have really tried to understand both on a quantitative and qualitative level what the major challenges are, as well as business attitudes towards other areas like trade policy, longer term business conditions, net zero, COVID, etc. If I just take each of those four areas in turn, and then we can touch on some of the stats that go into more detail on this. The first area is inflation. And what we're seeing is unprecedented pressure on businesses. And that's emerged, I would say, from the start of 2021 onwards. Now it's really prevalent, and most businesses are reporting at least some form of pressure on costs and pressure to raise prices. The key interesting development now, actually from our most recent survey last month, is that remuneration, salaries, wages, etc., has emerged as the top form of price pressure. That sits alongside utilities, so gas and electricity. But for manufacturers, as you'll see, they are far more exposed to a wider range of cost pressures. And for them, raw materials remains the top source of cost pressure. Now, worryingly, micro firms are the least able to absorb these increases, and I'll touch on that in a second. So that's one issue. The second issue is on exporting more generally. And what we've seen in our data over the last few months is that it's quite a worrying picture in some respects. So the global supply chain crisis, coupled with Brexit, seems to have disproportionately affected UK exporters, more so than firms that trade domestically only. And so from our quarterly economic survey, we've seen that most exporters in aggregate, obviously there are things differ on a case-by-case basis, but on aggregate, most exporters have not reported improvements to export sales. On the TCA in particular, we're seeing some really serious challenges persist. In some cases, these challenges are worsening. And there's I would say, unfortunately, there's a widespread perception now that the TCA is not enabling growth for UK exporters. And again, there will be differences on a case-by-case basis, but in general terms, certainly the data we're getting back would suggest that most exporters feel that it's not enabling growth. Finally, on investment, what we're seeing is perhaps a more positive outlook, to finish on a positive, and that is that as we exit Plan B measures and indeed the COVID pandemic more generally, there is an increased level of confidence among businesses. More firms expect to increase investment over the next 12 months. The challenge is, of course, that uncertainty about political development seems to be the key issue. So uncertainty about trade, uncertainty about the potential reintroduction of measures. So those are really the four top areas that we've identified in our surveys as being the key issues for businesses. If we just touch, I'll just skip through a few stats on this, just so you've got a bit of context. The first stat I think is quite important, which is that we're asking businesses what they expect their own prices to change by over the next 12 months, what percentage they expect their own prices to change. And overall, this is from January, by the way, so last month, overall, The average business expected their prices to increase by a median of 8%. So the median average was 8% increase over the next 12 months. But you may be already able to tell that for manufacturers, the median average was 10%, whereas for B2B service sector firms, that dropped down to 5%. Now, there were some major outliers. Some businesses expected 150, 200% increase to prices, but that's why we take the median, just to avoid some of that bias. But you can see straight away, though, that manufacturers are more likely to expect a higher percentage increase than professional service sector firms. What's driving that is really important. So there may be a bit too much on this graph to digest, but in short, what it's telling us is that remuneration and utilities have now emerged as the top sources of price pressures for businesses overall. So that bar in blue is businesses overall, and you've seen about almost 2/3 saying that utilities and remuneration are causing price pressures there. But what you also will see is that these purple bars representing manufacturers, they're higher across the board. So manufacturers are far more likely to be reporting pressures from a wider range of sources. And that makes sense because they're exposed to physical goods and international trade, shipping, etc. And these are all things that have really rocketed in price over the last 2 years. When we ask businesses how they're dealing with these prices, well, the top answer is that they in turn are increasing their own prices. So 3/4 are telling us that. But there's a worrying segment. It's a small minority, but I would say it's worrying nonetheless. Worrying segment of businesses that are saying, actually, these cost pressures are causing their business to look at scaling down or even ceasing trading. So we've got 5% of businesses in this sample of 1,000 businesses telling us that they would indeed actually cease trading, or at least consider cease trading as a result of increased costs. And that figure goes up for micro firms, so businesses with less than 10 employees. They're the least able to cope with price increases. If we look at trading more generally, one point I made up front was that we're currently seeing no improvement in the overall number of firms reporting improved export sales. This is taken from our quarterly economic survey. And what you see here, in short, is that at the start of the COVID-19 crisis, you saw a massive surge in businesses saying that exports had gone down. Since then, however, we've yet to see that same proportion of firms report improvements. In other words, we're yet to see a bounce back in the staggering number of firms that reported decreased export sales back in 2020. So I think this is a worrying sign. Obviously, the next quarter survey was taking place right now, so this will be a good indicator of where things currently stand. But as of Q4 2021, you saw that 80% of businesses reported no change, or indeed even a decrease in export sales. So that's when you compare that against some of the other statistics around domestic sales that we're collecting, which are showing improvement, I think we are starting to see that exports have a more challenging situation at present. On the TCA, we've been collecting data on this since the start of the agreement in January 2021. And again, the data that you're looking at now is consistent with what we've seen since the start of 2021. And this question, and this is yet to be released, this question looked at the extent to which businesses agreed or disagreed that the Trading Cooperation Agreement, TCA, was enabling their business to grow or increase sales. And I think worryingly, what you're finding overall for exporters, 71% are disagreeing that it's enabling their business to grow or increase sales, compared to just 12% who agree that it is. So this is consistent with what we've seen back in October, where we asked a similar question, albeit configured on the ability of businesses to adapt to the changes generated by the TCA. So this is the same sample of businesses, exporters, and we're asking here whether they found the adaptation of changes to goods, trade, services trade, transferring data and movement of people easy or difficult. And overall, 60% of exporters in October said that they were facing difficulties buying or selling goods or adapting to the rules for that. And as Stuart will get onto, we've got hundreds of comments on the specific challenges they're facing. On a more positive note here, actually data, and to a lesser extent moving people, was considered less of a challenge than goods movement. So the pinch points all seem to be around shipping goods around back and forth across Europe. That seemed to be the key set of challenges. When we look at trade priorities more broadly, we find when we ask businesses what should the government be focusing on, which markets should the government be focusing on? Well, the top answer is, again, looking at modifying the current deal with the European Union. 51% of businesses said that in our most recent survey. But after that, 36% said the UK government should focus on concluding deals with America. 25% said India, 24% said Canada, and 19% said China. So you've got a mix of markets. Some of the obvious markets that you might have considered as being thought of as the top priorities for businesses. But of course, modifying the deal with the European Union still comes out on top there. Our surveys have also highlighted some issues with the feeling that businesses are not engaged with the policy-making process, particularly on trade. So, for instance, we ask businesses if they feel that their views are considered when the UK government makes decisions about, for example, deciding priority markets for future deals, or deciding the terms of negotiation priorities, or assessing the practical impacts of new trade deals once implemented. Now, most firms, including exporters, do not feel that their views are currently heard all that well in the trade negotiation process. And BCC are obviously working tirelessly to be involved in the discussions and to make sure that we feed through the data that we're getting. And indeed, in some cases, the data that you're seeing is, in some cases, the most comprehensive that we have on what businesses need from future trade deals. So there is an issue there, but we're as an organisation, we actually are looking to try and fix some of that ourselves. Finally, before I hand over to Stuart, a more positive note, and that is that businesses in general are looking to grow over the next 12 months. So 63% of businesses say they expect to increase their growth over the next 12 months, whereas only 20% expect to decrease. Now, that's positive, and I think it's something that we need to really capitalise on, that there's appetite for growth there, but we need to start removing the obvious barriers to growth that our surveys have thrown up, namely challenges around international trade and the TCA, the threat of policy making on COVID, not going through rigorous scrutiny or assessment, and of course longer term shifts through, for example, to net zero and how businesses might be supported on that journey. So I think there's optimism, but it needs to be capitalised on. I'll just hand over to Stuart, my colleague, to look at some of the commentary that we've been getting back from businesses.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. This will be a very quick scan through what is hundreds and actually quite often thousands of individual comments we receive as part of these surveys. And I don't want to take too long because I know we're keen to get onto Liam and also give you guys plenty of time for questions as well. So across the various surveys that David's already touched upon, we've received a huge amount of comments which give us both individual details into specific circumstances that businesses are facing, but also when we take all those comments on aggregate, we can work out what the main themes are and what issues are coming up consistently by businesses. So in our Trade and Brexit survey towards the end of last year, 2021, we asked firms what the specific problems that we're facing with the TCA. And these were the main themes that emerged. There was a huge range of different issues that came up, but broadly speaking, it can be categorized like this. VAT, the requirement to pay VAT when goods entered the country, is causing issues for companies. Customs delays were causing issues for firms reporting confusion, additional checks, and also an inconsistent application of the rules. Rules of origin causing issues for firms, as perhaps you're aware of. We also heard a lot about problems with both recruiting and retaining EU staff, whether that's because staff have returned home from positions in the UK, or firms have found difficulty bringing staff from the EU back across to the UK. We also heard a lot about problems with the Northern Ireland Protocol, both from companies in Great Britain looking to move goods to Northern Ireland, and also firms in Northern Ireland as well. And across a range of different types of equivalents, we also heard that firms were facing issues, whether that's financial service, medical devices, and also hearing more and more about problems with certification marking from firms within our surveys. So what's great is we continue to ask about the TCA, and you'll notice in that previous question we asked about what the challenges were, what the issues were, but we're also keen to understand more about what, if any, advantages firms were finding from the TCA, and get as broad a perspective as possible from different firms. So we asked that, and we asked broadly what the advantages were and what some of the disadvantages were. And you can see that the sort of kind of rough bar chart at the top just puts things a little bit into context. When we're talking about these comments about the advantages of the TCA, we received far fewer of those, so around 59 compared to 320 talking about disadvantages. But the advantages we did hear about, you can see, are from some firms saying that the TCA has broadly allowed them to continue trading without too much of a change, recognizing that some delays have occurred, but broadly speaking, they've been able to trade as they were before. The TCA has also, for some, encouraged them to take advantage of more global trading opportunities, whether they were firms that were already doing that and have moved more in that direction, or some firms that perhaps had only traded with the EU before, but because of the changing rules have been encouraged to look more broadly. And also you can see there's a number of firms that are just happy to have a little bit more stability. Speaking of the disadvantages, and again, for the context, you can see that there's far more comments in this area talking about some of the things that we've already discussed in the previous slide, so I won't go through this in too much detail: cost, delays, paperwork, and all those things combining to make some UK firms feel like they've become far less competitive, and hearing that from their EU partners as well, whether that's because the EU partners have actually experienced difficulty, or whether it's just because of the perception that there might be if they're trying to move goods from the UK. We've also asked across almost all of our surveys anyway, but this one comes from our most up-to-date one, our Business Outlook survey that took place just in January. And it's a totally open-ended question. And we asked for unprompted feedback on what the challenges and opportunities are. And you can see again, there's a little bar chart in the top corner that shows that Brexit and trade with the EU comes up as the most common issue listed by businesses. Of course, if you see the other ones, you can see that cost, inflation, and energy grouped all together, they would emerge as the biggest issue. But as a standalone single issue, Brexit remains still among the top challenges that businesses are facing. And you can see just from some of the examples I've included there, the amount of detail we're getting back from businesses is absolutely fantastic. And we're able to feed that straight into the top levels of government and let them know exactly many of the issues that businesses in our membership are facing. So that was a whirlwind tour. We've got loads of these comments and loads of really great detail, but I will pass back to David just for a quick summary, and then to our other speakers.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, so very briefly in summary, inflation has emerged as the top issue, I would say, in general terms. But of course, the new requirements flowing from the TCA have in some cases compounded the issues around the global supply chain crisis that we've seen, and added more administrative burdens onto businesses looking to trade with the European Union. More positively though, there is appetite for growth now that we are moving out of the COVID pandemic, and I think that's something that we should be looking to capitalise on. With that, I will hand back to Emmanuel.
David, Stuart, thank you very much for the insight. We have plenty of questions. So what we'll do, we'll move on to Liam for some more information, and then we'll wrap all the questions at the end. But please keep them coming, and we'll try to answer as many as possible. So Liam, over to you. We cannot hear you. Nope, you're still muted because of.
That's better, I think.
Yeah, and
Okay,
yeah,
good.
we're not seeing the presentation screen yet.
I'm not doing well, am I? Let me just see what I need to do here. Something's gone awry. Let me stop and start sharing again then. In that case.
Isn't it great, you know, technology failing at
It is rather,
key
isn't
moment?
it?
Yeah.
Are you seeing now?
Great. Yes, it's just not in presentation, but we can see the slides.
That's good. Well, now that you can see it, I can put it in presentation
Perfect.
mode. Anyway, thanks to everyone so far. And I guess my message is keep your questions coming. There's a number that have come through to us that I'm looking forward to getting to. But in the meantime, a bit like in the flavour of what David talked about, I'll have a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of what's been happening in the customs environment that's affecting traders. And I'll try and give you a sense of what traders are telling us. But let's start with what's actually we're about. We talk trade. As Emmanuel said, I have two hats. I work for the BCC as Director of Trade Facilitation. And in that role, I'm making great use of the research that David and his team are doing to provide the evidence base for engagement with a number of departments, including the Department of International Trade, Scottish Development Agency, and Northern Ireland with the Northern Ireland authorities there and the devolved nations, with political stakeholders, but also looking outside the UK at the international chambers of commerce and the work that's been done in other countries to develop trade policies and trade processes to make trade easier for businesses. We're also members of a number of different consultation groups with government, but I highlight a few in there, including the National Trade Facilitation Committee, the JCCC run by HMRC, and we're also have observer status at the World Customs Organization on rules of origin. In addition to that, of course, there's the very practical import and export support offered across our network of chambers. Many of you will be members of those chambers, and if you're not, I encourage you to join. But there are new challenges and added costs, and David has alluded to some of those cost pressures that are happening for businesses across the UK. That said, there are also additional costs at the border that are adding to those pressures. And so from the 21st of January, we have had full customs controls at UK borders. So all imports and all exports require a full customs declaration. They also require that any import duty and tariffs must be accounted for at the point of import. You can no longer an option to delay, although you can use postponed VAT accounting for any VAT that may be required and account for the VAT due on your next tax return. Now, businesses are telling us that it remains difficult. There are a number of things that I'm going to talk about that are causing some pressure for businesses, not just in cost, but actually in time and the ease with which they're able to do this work. It is complicated. So what's changed for traders? A couple of things have expired. First thing is the easement on supplier declarations. Now, we talk to businesses, this has passed a number of businesses by. What the readout from the announcement from government last year was that they didn't need a supplier's declaration, they didn't need a statement of origin from a supplier when they were importing goods. They could simply just claim the goods as being free of duty under the TCA or any other trade agreement, and could claim preferential tariffs. That's not true. That's not the case. It was never the intention, and that's not really what the government said. What they said was there was an easement on the time you could take to have that supplier's declaration on the imports coming in last year. The change is that you no longer have time. You must have the supplier's declaration or the statement on origin or an EUR1 in place at the time of an export or by importer's knowledge. So you have to have that in place now when you import. For those importations you made last year, you have to gather that evidence retrospectively. HMRC are already signing letters asking people to prove their entitlement to duty-free imports. And so you should make sure you have that information in place from your suppliers so that you can evidence your right to those zero tariff duty payments, or zero tariff duty. What's also expired is the easement on deferred supplementary declarations, meaning that staged customs controls have ended. There's no more entry in declarant record and then a supplementary later, or the 175-day delay for declarations. What's new is 350 sets of amendments in UK commodity codes. If there was ever a time to check the HS code for the goods you're importing, it's absolutely now, because 5,500 of them have changed. 351 at header level and others subsequently at below header level. So you should be checking your commodity codes that you're declaring on your imports and exports. And what's also new is on plant products and products of animal origin, there has to be pre-notification of their imminent arrival in the UK from the EU. And as some of you have discovered, I imagine that unless they're pre-notified to the UK IPAF's database, they cannot travel. I understand there were a number that were able to travel in the early days of this change in January, but they are really being clamped down on now. And then probably the slightly bigger text, because slightly bigger impact on businesses so far has been the introduction of GVMS system for Great Britain that has proved to be problematic, certainly in some cases, because drivers are not UK-based drivers. They're having to get tuned into the system. And there does appear to be some issues with the ANPR cameras at ports not always recording the vehicle having passed through and cleared the port, which is proving to be difficult on some occasions. But by and large, it's bedded in well, but there are some niggles still for some businesses. I should mention at this stage that whilst our research is showing that the government, businesses don't feel consulted by government, and that's how they feel, I would say that government has really tried to engage with businesses, both through our own networks, and we've engaged with our members to feed in on consultations over the last 12 months since Brexit happened. But also what's happening right now is a consultation on something called the single trader window. When you receive these slides, you'll find these are hyperlinked and it will take you right to the page concerned. There's also a consultation on something called an ecosystem of trust, which is going to be like AEO, authorized economic operator, turbocharged maybe, I don't know, but a way of recognizing when government can trust businesses and their supply chains. Thirdly, there's the HMRC are doing a consultation on an independent customs regime. I won't try and explain that. The link is there. Please go and look at it. And there are lots of free trade agreement consultations. The most recent having been announced yesterday on UK-Israel trade. So government is trying to consult. The challenge for businesses, I think, is one of time and pressures to do other things. And so if you're members of chambers, then we will try and gather your thoughts and summarise them in a consultation submission from British Chambers of Commerce, which is something that we do. Coming up, though, there's more change over the course of this year, really related to border controls and food, products of animal origin, animal and plant health, and so on. And these are various deadlines. In July 2022, this year, a matter of months away, there'll be documentary and identity checks at border control posts and plant products and meat products from the EU. They begin. EU's been doing that since Brexit. We're implementing that in stages. Safety and security certificates will be required to accompany consignments, and it's the responsibility of the carrier, whether that's the truck that the goods move in, the ferry they get transported in, or the aircraft that come in. It's the responsibility of the carrier to ensure the safety and security certificates are in place. And there's also new requirements on EHCs and phytosanitary certificates. Come September, the same rules will apply on dairy and dairy products, and come November, it will be on fish products, and composite products, those ready meals, for example, pizzas, cream liqueurs. I give some examples there. those goods coming from the EU will require those additional checks on the 1st of November. But there's also more, because amongst all of this mix, there's the commencement or the start of the migration of traders from Chief to CDS for imports. I say that's March. There's no official date, but actually, if you look forward, that gives 6 months up to September, when actually Chief closes for import clearance, and all imports will have to be cleared on CDS. So my suggestion is that businesses should start to move towards CDS clearances and start thinking about that in March, so that it's in place by September. We incidentally at Chamber Customs are already doing clearances on CDS at import. And then April, May, we should be starting to think about the migration across to CDS for export declarations, because come March 2023, Chief closes for export clearances. So this is a year of change in terms of the software that businesses use, the customs agents and brokers like ourselves that they use, and making sure that you're working with someone who's ready for those deadlines and that change. But we don't just talk trade, we do trade. Chamber Customs is we are expert in the complexities of import and export. Customers tell us, and we aim to be high in compliance, but also efficient and fast in processing customs declarations. We do know our stuff. Anyway, we're a business that is engaged in, we call it brokerage. What that means for us is that not only do we make sure that your goods get across the border in time, but we do all of the work. We don't send the work to anyone else. We don't subcontract to anyone. And we support businesses of all shapes and all sizes. We are connected. We're the only customs broker with connections to all air, sea, land clearance ports in the UK, whether they're inventory linked, we are connected to them, or non-inventory linked. So no matter where your goods arrive into the UK, we can clear the port for you. We don't subcontract to anyone. We also have plenty of examples where we've been able to make savings for the businesses we work with, whether that's in the port charges for the goods crossing the border, or declaring the right commodity codes, so people are absolutely getting the duty-free where it should apply, and that the commodity codes they're declaring are right, or those that are using our fast track service where they're actually just saving on time as well as financially. We can make savings for people, and our heart is absolutely in compliance. And I always say at this point that people should remember that a customs declaration is a tax return, and it's one you make for every consignment, and that's how important it is. It's important that those tax returns are accurate, and we would always say you should get a specialist to do that. You wouldn't just get anyone to do your accounts for your business, would you? So we only focus on the fiscal elements of the goods and make sure that your declaration to HMRC is compliant with the latest border operating model. That's all that we do. How we work, two ways. One is through the fast track clearance, where we basically let you use our system to upload your customs entries. Sometimes that's from an output from your own systems. So you've keyed it already in one system, why key it again? Why not take an extract and upload? Other times it's people just using our system to make their declarations. And the process of doing that actually means that businesses learn an awful lot more about what's involved in customs clearance. But for those that don't want to do that, we have a fully assisted customs clearance service available as well. So both options there. One's technical, uses technology, one uses communication. We also act as customs advisors, and we have a number of very smart people who are expert in international trade who go into businesses and help them to understand what they need to do to be compliant. Sometimes that involves a bit of a gap analysis. What are you doing now versus what you ought to be doing? And then from that, we can develop a plan for you to make sure that you're not only compliant today, but in future as well. And if you want your team to have some training to bring them up to speed and upgrade their knowledge and skills, then we can do that too. We train not only our own customs agents, we train other people's customs agents as well. We want to see compliance in the industry. We want businesses that are members of our chambers and not to be able to access customs clearance services where the focus is on getting it right rather than getting it done. And so we do offer our training outside of our own business. I'm now going to show you a short video, which I hope explains a little bit about the challenges that we're seeing now and looking back over the 12 months that have just elapsed to December last year, some of the issues that people are facing. So hopefully this is going to play and technology is not going to let me down.
We're not getting any audio, Liam. So we're having some technical problems with the audio. So I don't think anybody can hear it. So I think what we'll do, we'll share that, Liam, in the presentation. I think the audio is not coming through.
Oh, is the sound not coming through?
No, probably it's not shared with sound, but we can probably post the link to the video in the presentation.
Okay, well, fortunately, I've actually made a summary of what it says. Okay, so my apologies. It worked last time, is all I'll say, but it clearly not worked this time. Sorry for wasting your time on that. But the link will be in the presentation that you get sent. So the common issues from 2021 is that basically goods continue to arrive from January 2021 from or via the EU, and traders have often assumed that the supplier is taking care of the import processes. So some traders were not even aware of their responsibilities to make entries in their own records, whilst they were taken advantage of stage customs controls, but didn't know it. So consequently, they have failed to record the entry in declaratory records. They've failed to account for import VAT using postponed VAT accounting. They've failed to make a supplementary declaration within 175 days of import. They've failed to ask for or keep the supplier declarations or EUR1s. That only applies if the goods were subject to anything greater than a zero tariff. And they've yet to apply for a duty deferment account and waiver, haven't ordered MSS reports from HMRC to check entries made under their EORI number, assuming they have one, and therefore they're at risk of penalties of £2,500 for each issue, up to £10,000 at any given year. And actually a consequence of that can be that a business can be banned from being able to claim preference tariffs in future. So just to give you an idea of what we do with that when we come across a business like that, one of the things that the ways that we can help is we can help to deliver a gap analysis of the data you have. And we have worked with businesses where this is exactly the scenario that I've just described. So we set out what's missing and give some idea about where to find the information. We check what has and has not been declared to HMRC. We help to compile a spreadsheet of all the missing entries. We typically add that company to our simplified declaration authorization, and we collate the evidence for preference tariff claims if they are required. We advise on the correspondence that you should have with HMRC for self-reporting, and we try to help you avoid the penalties. And then we batch submit all of the missing entries as simplified declarations using our Exabler platform. And then we can provide advice on future record keeping and compliance, provide training for the team if it's appropriate. But if you discover that you've got a lot of missing entries, then contact us, because we can help you. I'll stop there, Emmanuel. I think I've said enough, and I know there are a number of questions that have come in on the chat when I've been on, so let's get to those.
Thank you, Liam. I think one of the first question I wanted to convey is, what is your opinion? I mean, there is a problem that both David and Stuart and you have named, and is that paying VAT upfront has crippled cash positions of many companies. And you reported in your results that businesses have failed to use PVA. Why are businesses not taking advantage of this facility that the government has introduced? What's your view? Why is this happening?
Is this just for me?
It's for the panel. I mean, I'm very happy to hear from you, from David, or from Stuart, because the problem that you both highlighted. I don't know, David, perhaps if you have a view on this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Liam will have more detailed knowledge about this particular issue, but in general terms, I would boil it down that as SMEs in particular are in a world of information pollution, and they're not able to process the requisite amount of information that's now required of them. And we see this across, you've highlighted VAT, but we saw it across a wide range of issues relating to the concrete changes that were required ahead of Brexit, regardless of the deal. So like EORI numbers or transitional simplified procedures. Very, very low, well, basically even exporters, a lot of exporters didn't really know what these terms meant or what they had to do. But we also saw it across COVID. We see it with net zero. There's a lot of requirements now placed on SMEs, and they're mathematically not able to cope with the scale of change, because if your staff consists of maybe only 5 or 10 people, there's an obvious capacity constraint on that. But Liam, I don't know whether you've got any thoughts about this.
Yeah, it's pretty simply that they don't know and they don't understand how to do it, and it's just too onerous to think about it. And so doing what you've always done becomes easy. And actually, we'd encourage people to. This is not complicated. If you're not using postponed VAT accounting, then go onto HMRC website. You'll see the guidance. It really is not complicated to do this, and any FD or accountancy accountant you may be using will be able to administer that through your VAT return in the future. And you don't need to apply for it. You just need to do it.
And Liam, just to add to that and to ask another question that we've got in the list of what's come through. Is this something that will cost money?
No, it'll save money. It will save money by, well, if you're borrowing money from your bank, you need to borrow less because your cash flow will be enhanced by it. I know postponed VAT accounting is something that we lobbied and campaigned for I think around about, well, from the point of the Brexit result until November 2019, when the Chancellor announced that PVA would come into play on Brexit Day. We campaigned for this. This actually existed prior to the single market for businesses, and so we were bringing the way that VAT is treated in every other way back into line. So it's a big win for us. It's benefited lots of firms, but we want it to better benefit every importing firm and help their cash flow.
That's great. Thank you. Now, before we go back to, we have some more generic questions on the data that David and Stuart prepared. Before we go there, there is another question in terms of what else can people do to reduce these increasing costs of importing goods into the UK?
What else can they do?
Yeah. You mentioned a few things. I was wondering if you had any other words of wisdom, to reduce that burden.
Of course, I would say ask Chamber Customs to do all your customs clearances, wouldn't I? And you'd expect me to. But some of the pinch points in terms of costs, we've seen a big increase in transport costs over the last year. We've got, things like fuel prices are increasing. But one of the easy questions to ask your supplier is, what premium do they place on any charges that are levied by the ports? So the ports have got published charges readily available on the internet, is to ask what that premium is, because those, I've seen some extraordinary premiums placed on transactions on port fees. A port fee of trading standards inspection at £90 being charged out at £180. That seems excessive to me. So there's lots of hidden charges. For comparison, incidentally, our charge is 10% of the fee. So we would have charged £99, £90 plus a £9 handling fee. So there's hidden charges such as those that you can maybe play with. And the other thing is, if you haven't gone out to tender on your transport costs, then maybe now is a good time to do that, and just to check that you're getting good value, because those are the most significant elements of the fees, that are the costs of getting goods across the border.
That's great. Thank you for that. And if I can go back to David and Stuart, you mentioned that one of the big things was this increase in price across the board and on different things, and cost in brokerage is only one of them. Does your data suggest that these price increases are here to stay? What do you think the longevity of this price increase is going to be?
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky question. It's something that certainly the Bank of England is trying to get their head around. I would say from our perspective, we've been getting signals through since the start of 2021 on price increases. And I think as time's gone on, they're more and more getting baked into the pie. So we're expecting longer term inflation. So once some of this is a ratchet effect. So for example, when shipping containers go up by 700%, it's going to be tricky for them to go back to pre-pandemic levels. Same with steel, same with cardboard, etc. So that starts to bake things in. The key question then, I think, becomes around salaries. Once salaries start to get baked in, and some businesses that we're speaking to us saying sort of 5%, 6, 7, 8% increases this year. And of course, you saw remuneration has come out as the top price pressure. Once that starts to get embedded, it's much harder to reverse course on inflation. So I think we've started to see that ratchet effect over the last year.
Yeah, that's great. And I have a rather large question here, and I don't know if in the remaining 5 minutes we can cover it, but what conclusion can you draw after this few months in terms of an overall positive or negative effect of the EU, Brexit in the UK or in Europe? It's a rather large question, but I don't know if you have some nuggets that you would like to share.
Well,
David, go.
Yeah, so from my side, I mean, there's a lot to contend with there. I would say in general terms that what we can say about the TCA is that it has increased the amount of cost and paperwork placed on businesses looking to trade with Europe. That's first and foremost. And we've been getting that through since the start of the process. So businesses overwhelmingly are telling us that's what's caused the problems. It's the delays, it's the increased paperwork, and it's the increased costs. Interestingly, there may be, and this is something that Stuart found in the commentary, there may be a potential benefit built into all of this, which is that once businesses, if and when businesses overcome those challenges, it then equips them to deal with non-EU markets better, for example. So if you've been a business that's traded exclusively with the European Union for a few decades, for example, you've never had to contend with much paperwork. Now that you do, as a potential positive side effect is that actually equips you to then deal with markets around the world. But I would say that it's a tough way of getting to that benefit. Certainly what we've seen in the last year is that there's a lot of problems to contend with, and those problems don't seem to be going away anytime soon.
And the only thing I would add is that if you, to all of that, is that if you were to look at our trade flows, so trade volumes from GB to EU, EU GB, EU UK, UK EU. And you were to compare, because one of the things that we've had to contend with COVID. We have to accept that was a factor that affected trade, and David showed a massive change in the volume of exports during that initial impact of COVID. So COVID is a factor. However, it's also a factor for Germany, for France, for Italy, and for those other EU countries. And what we're seeing in the emerging trade data is that the UK has fared much worse in terms of the volume of exports and the trending of export, the change in export volumes, both out of the UK and into the UK imports as well, which are a factor of Brexit. So we've had some displacement of businesses moving their distribution from UK into other EU countries. We've had quite a lot of that. Some moving to Northern Ireland, where the customs arrangements are like being in the single market. And so that displacement has meant that there are fewer raw materials coming to the UK than there were before, but there's also fewer goods being exported from the UK than there were before. We'll know in the round what the effect of that is. It's probably too early to say, because a lot of trade negotiation is going on right now. And I know that in the chat, Emmanuel, some people have asked asking questions, for example, what's the right balance between migration, innovation, and Brexit? Well, actually, Brexit has happened. It's in the past. We're very focused on trying to make the trading environment the best it can be, and lobbying our government and ministers and departments to make life easier for traders in getting their goods across borders. And we have very ambitious plans on how we think the government should be growing our exports, so that, just as a segue, but a little example, 1 in 10 businesses in the UK export goods. 6 out of 10 businesses in chamber membership export goods. So we have a big constituency of businesses that join chambers because of the help and support they get to do much more in international trade and exporting. And so, one of the ways we need to shift the dial is to get many more businesses exporting, either for the first time or to more countries.
Yeah, that's great. So I think we have answered as many questions as we can manage. I know that Heidi is doing some work to reach out to people who have logged in and post questions. We will try our best to answer. A recording of this presentation will be available anyway with the slides. So I think the only last thing for me to do is to thank Stuart, David, Liam for the precious information, and of course all of the participants for spending this hour with us. And we will hope to see you at our next webinar. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Emmanuel.
Thanks, everyone.